The rain had soaked through Eleanor's cardigan by the time she reached the bus stop, her termination letter crumpling inside her pocket with each step. 43 years old, and she had never been fired from anything in her life. The Millbrook Public Library had been her sanctuary for 12 years, her quiet kingdom of Dewey Decimals and whispered recommendations. Now it was gone, stripped away because she had committed the unforgivable sin of compassion. She could still see Director Morrison's thin lips forming the words, his reading glasses perched on his nose like a judgment. Letting unauthorized persons remain after hours. Failure to follow protocol. Endangering library property. What he meant, but would not say, was that she had let the strange child stay. The pale girl, with the enormous dark eyes who appeared every evening at 6, and read until Eleanor had to gently tap her shoulder at closing time. Mira never spoke of her home, never mentioned parents, never gave a last name. She simply materialized among the folklore stacks like a whisper made flesh. And Eleanor had recognized something in those ancient eyes that lived in her own mirror. The loneliness of being other. The hunger for words when the world offered only silence. Eleanor had started leaving the back door unlocked on the coldest nights. She had begun forgetting to check the reading nook during her final walkthrough. Small rebellions, invisible kindnesses, until Mrs. Patterson from the city council had arrived for an unannounced inspection and found Mira curled beneath the biography section with 3 volumes of Romanian history and a flashlight Eleanor had accidentally left behind. The scandal had been swift and absolute. A child, unattended, in a public building after hours. Never mind that Mira was safer among books than wherever she disappeared to each dawn. Never mind that Eleanor had been the only person in this entire town to see the girl as something other than wrong. The bus shelter offered little protection from the driving rain, and Eleanor's bones ached with the particular weariness of injustice. She had given Millbrook Library her best years, her careful attention, her genuine love for every patron who wandered through those doors seeking escape, or knowledge, or simply a warm place to exist. All of it meant nothing against the weight of propriety. She sensed his presence before she saw him, a shift in the air pressure, a deepening of the shadows beneath the shelter's overhang. When she turned, he was simply there, as if he had always been standing 3 feet to her left, tall, impossibly so, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on a coin from some forgotten empire. His eyes were the color of aged amber, and they held a weight that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. He wore a coat that probably cost more than her annual salary. Charcoal wool that seemed untouched by the rain despite the storm raging around them. Everything about him suggested power so absolute it had become invisible, like gravity or time. He did not belong in Millbrook. He did not belong anywhere that traffic lights and bus schedules held dominion. Yet here he stood, watching her with an expression she could not name, his head tilted slightly as if listening to music only he could hear. "You are the librarian," he said. Not a question. His voice carried an accent she could not place, something ancient wrapped in modern consonants, the one they dismissed for sheltering the child. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to the letter in her pocket. Word travels fast in small towns. The stranger's lips curved, though the expression held no warmth. "Word travels faster in my circles, Eleanor Price. The child you protected belongs to my household. She has been missing for 3 weeks. The world tilted beneath Eleanor's feet. She gripped the metal pole of the bus shelter, her knuckles white. Mira has a family? Something flickered in those amber eyes. Pain, perhaps, or something older and more complex. She has a king, and a court that has been searching for her with increasing desperation since she fled our protection." He stepped closer, and Eleanor caught his scent. cedar and something darker, older, like pages from a book that had survived centuries. My name is Kalen Voss. I am what your folklore section would call a vampire, though that word carries so many inaccuracies that I hesitate to use it. Mira is my ward, the last survivor of a bloodline I swore to protect, and you are the first human in 200 years to show her genuine kindness without knowing what she was. Eleanor should have been afraid. Every rational cell in her body screamed that this was impossible, that she was hallucinating from stress and rain and the shock of unemployment. But she had spent 43 years learning to read people through their book choices, and what she read in Kalen Voss was not predation. It was exhaustion. It was the particular grief of someone who had searched too long and feared too much. She never mentioned any of that, Eleanor said quietly. She just wanted to read about history, about Romania and the old ways. Kalen closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked impossibly old. She was trying to understand what she is, what she will become. Her transition approaches, and she is terrified. He opened his eyes, fixing Eleanor with a gaze that seemed to see through skin and bone, to something essential beneath. You let her stay when everyone else turned away. You lost your livelihood to protect a child you believed was simply different. Why? The question hung between them, heavier than the rain. Eleanor thought of her own childhood, the years of being too quiet, too strange, too lost in books to navigate the brutal simplicity of playground politics. She thought of every patron who had found refuge in her library, every lonely soul who had discovered that words could be bridges, when the world offered only walls. Because different should not mean alone, she said. Because kindness costs nothing, and cruelty costs everything, even when no one is watching. Something shifted in Kalen's expression. The cold authority softened into something rawer, more vulnerable than she would have expected from a creature of legend. She told me about you, he said, through the blood bond we share. She showed me your face, your voice, the way you recommended books as if you were prescribing medicine for the soul. She called you the safe place. Eleanor's eyes burned with unexpected tears. Where is she now? Kalen's jaw tightened. That is why I am here. She fled my protection because she overheard something she was not meant to hear. There are factions within my court who believe her bloodline is too dangerous to allow to mature. They have convinced her that I intend to end her life before her transition. The rain intensified, drumming against the shelter's roof like desperate fingers. Eleanor's mind raced through every conversation she had shared with Mira, every silent moment of companionship among the stacks. The girl had never mentioned fear, never spoken of danger. She had simply existed in the library's quiet embrace, consuming knowledge, as if it might save her life. Perhaps it had. Perhaps the folklore and history had been research, preparation, a map for survival in a world Eleanor was only beginning to understand. She trusts me, Eleanor said slowly. If I could talk to her, explain that she is safe. Kalen shook his head. She trusts no one from my world now. The betrayal she believes she witnessed has poisoned every connection she had to our kind. But you, Eleanor Price, you are human. You have no stake in vampire politics, no allegiance to any faction. You showed her compassion when you believed her to be nothing more than an odd child. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, cream-colored and heavy. I am asking for your help, not as a king commanding a subject, but as a guardian who has failed someone precious and is desperate enough to beg. The envelope contained more money than Eleanor had ever seen in one place, enough to live comfortably for years, enough to never worry about rent or groceries, or the small indignities of poverty. She looked at the bills, then at Kalen's face, searching for the trap she had been trained by a lifetime of disappointment to expect. What exactly are you asking me to do? Kalen's expression was grave. Come with me to my estate. Let me explain the true situation, the dangers Mira faces if she remains in hiding. Then help me find her before my enemies do. Every sensible instinct screamed refusal. She had just lost her job for breaking rules, for letting her heart overrule protocol. This was infinitely more dangerous, a step into a world she could barely comprehend. But she kept seeing Mira's face, those dark eyes that held too much knowledge and too little safety. She kept hearing the girl's voice asking if there were any more books about wolves and moons and girls who became something other than what they were born to be. The money stays here, Eleanor said, pushing the envelope back toward Kalen. If I help you, it is because Mira deserves someone in her corner who is not part of your court's politics, not because I can be bought. For the first time, something like genuine warmth flickered in Kalen's ancient eyes. She said you would say that. She said you were the kind of person who returned overpaid change and cried when the library had to discard damaged books. He took the envelope back without argument. My car is nearby. Will you come? Eleanor looked at the bus schedule. The rain, the gray future stretching ahead of her filled with job applications and rejection letters. Then she looked at Kalen Voss, vampire king, immortal creature of legend, who was watching her with something uncomfortably close to hope. Take me to your estate, she said. Tell me everything. And understand that if you are lying, if this is some elaborate trap, I will find a way to make you regret it. Librarians are very good at research, and I imagine your kind have weaknesses I could discover. Kalen's laugh was unexpected, rich and warm, transforming his severe features into something almost beautiful. I believe you would, Eleanor Price. I believe you absolutely would. The estate was not what Eleanor had expected. She had imagined Gothic spires and crumbling stone, something from the novels she had spent decades shelving. Instead, Kalen's home sprawled across a hillside like a modern monastery, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that should have been impossible for creatures who supposedly feared sunlight. He explained as they drove through iron gates that opened without visible mechanism, that the myths were mostly wrong. Sunlight weakened but did not destroy. Garlic was simply unpleasant, like a strong perfume. Crosses and holy water had no effect whatsoever. What could kill his kind was far more prosaic. Fire, decapitation, a stake through the heart. Or in Mira's case, the political machinations of immortals who feared what her bloodline represented. She is the last of the Valeriu, Kalen said, leading Eleanor through hallways lined with art that belonged in museums. A family that dates back to the first vampires, those who did not need to be turned, but were born to this existence. Her blood carries power that is not manifested in 3 centuries. When she transitions, she will be able to do things that most of my kind have forgotten wherever possible. Eleanor absorbed this, filing it away in the mental catalog she had spent a lifetime developing. And your enemies want her dead because they fear that power. Kalen nodded, stopping before a door of dark wood. There are those who believe the old bloodlines should remain extinct. They see Mira as a threat to the careful balance we have maintained with the human world. Better to eliminate her quietly than risk what she might become. He opened the door, revealing a study that made Eleanor's heart ache with longing. Walls of books, thousands of them, leather-bound and ancient alongside modern paperbacks. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth. Deep chairs surrounded a reading table that held a single photograph in a silver frame. Mira, perhaps 3 years younger, smiling at the camera with none of the shadows that had haunted her eyes in the library. I found her in the ruins of her family's home, Kalen said quietly. The Vasilescus, a lesser house sworn to my court, had tracked her bloodline for decades and finally succeeded in eliminating everyone except her. She was 6 years old, hiding in a cupboard, covered in her mother's blood. Eleanor sank into one of the deep chairs, overwhelmed by the weight of the story. You saved her. Kalen moved to the window, his back to her, his reflection absent from the glass. I saved her body. Her spirit has been in hiding ever since, protecting itself from further loss by refusing to fully connect with anyone, even me. He turned and his ancient eyes glistened with something Eleanor recognized from her own mirror on the hardest nights. Until you. Until the kind librarian who let her stay past closing and recommended books about transformation and survival. She bonded with you, Eleanor. She let you in when she had kept everyone else at arm's length for 9 years. The revelation settled over Eleanor like a blanket, warm and terrifying. The conversations we had, she murmured, the way she asked about my life, my childhood. I thought she was just curious. Kalen smiled sadly. She was learning to trust, practicing, through you, what it might feel like to have someone safe. And then she overheard Counselor Dravik telling his allies that the transition could not be allowed to complete, and everything she had built with you crumbled into fear. Eleanor stood, driven by a sudden fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. Then we find her. We find her and we explain, and we make sure no one touches her. Kalen's expression flickered with something she could not identify. You would stand against vampires centuries old for a child you barely know. Eleanor met his amber gaze without flinching. I would stand against anything for a child I helped feel safe. That is what it means to be a safe place. You do not abandon the people who trust you. The silence stretched between them, charged with something that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. Kalen crossed the distance between them with predator grace, stopping close enough that she could feel the impossible coolness of his presence. He smelled like cedar in old books, and something else, something that whispered of moonlit forests and ancient promises. You are extraordinary, he said softly. I have lived for over 400 years, and I have never encountered anyone quite like you. Eleanor's breath caught, but she refused to look away. I am an unemployed librarian who talks to books and cannot keep a houseplant alive. I am the opposite of extraordinary. Kalen reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek without quite touching. You see what matters. You protect what deserves protecting. You sacrifice for those who cannot repay you. His hand dropped, and he stepped back with visible effort. We should focus on finding Mira. There will be time later to explore whatever this is. Eleanor nodded, grateful for the reprieve from an intensity she was not prepared to examine. Where would she go, if she was frightened and alone and trying to hide from your entire world? Kalen moved to a map pinned to one wall, a sprawling representation of the region marked with symbols Eleanor did not recognize. She would go somewhere books have given her courage, somewhere stories have made her feel powerful. He traced a finger along the map. There is an abandoned monastery in the mountains, a place featured in several of the Romanian histories she requested from your library. It was once a sanctuary for those fleeing persecution. The drive to the mountains took hours, through winding roads that grew increasingly treacherous as night deepened. Kalen explained the politics of his court, the factions that jockeyed for influence, the delicate balance between those who wanted integration with humans and those who viewed mortality as a disease to be avoided. Mira's bloodline represented change, and change was the one thing immortals feared most. By the time they reached the monastery, dawn was threatening the eastern horizon. The ruins clung to a cliff face like a prayer refusing to die, stone walls crumbling but still standing, testament to something that had outlasted empires. Eleanor felt the weight of history pressing against her chest as they climbed the narrow path. She is here, Kalen murmured, his head tilted in that listening posture she was beginning to recognize. I can feel her through the blood bond, faint but present. He stopped, gripping Eleanor's arm with gentle urgency. Let me approach first. If she sees me before I can explain... A sound split the pre-dawn silence, a scream that turned Eleanor's blood to ice. Not fear, but fury. The rage of a cornered creature facing its end. Kalen moved too fast for human eyes to track, and Eleanor ran after him through the monastery's shattered doors into a courtyard that had become a battlefield. Mira stood at the center, surrounded by 5 figures in dark clothing, who moved with the same inhuman grace as Kalen. Blood streaked the girl's pale face, and her eyes had gone entirely black, no white remaining twin voids that reflected nothing. She held something in her hands that glowed with sickly green light, and she was screaming words in a language that made Eleanor's bones ache. "Dravik!" Kalen snarled, and one of the figures turned, a man with a face like carved marble and eyes that held no mercy. "My king, you are too late. The transition has begun, triggered by fear. We must end it now before she becomes something none of us can control." Eleanor did not think. She simply moved, placing herself between the glowing child and the creatures who wanted her dead. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "You do not touch her." Dravik laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "A human. How adorable. Step aside, mortal. This is not your concern." Eleanor straightened her spine, calling on every moment of quiet authority she had developed over 12 years of managing difficult patrons. "This child came to my library for safety. She trusted me when she trusted no one else. That makes her my concern." She turned to Mira, whose black eyes were fixed on her with something that might have been recognition. "Mira, sweetheart, it is Eleanor from the library. I'm here to help you." The glow in Mira's hands flickered. "You came," she whispered, and beneath the terrible power, Eleanor heard the voice of the lonely girl, who had asked for books about wolves and survival. "Of course I came. Safe places do not abandon their people." Eleanor extended her hand, slowly, carefully. "Whatever is happening to you, we will figure it out together. That is what we do, remember? We research. We find answers. We survive." Dravik moved faster than thought, and Kalen intercepted him with a crash that shook the ancient stones. The other vampires surged forward, but Mira's scream stopped them. The green light exploded outward, a wave of force that sent everyone except Eleanor flying backward. The child collapsed into Eleanor's arms, small and trembling and impossibly powerful. And Eleanor held her the way she had held countless frightened children in the library's reading corner during thunderstorms. "I have you," she murmured into Mira's dark hair. "I have you, and I am not letting go." When Kalen rose from the rubble, Dravik pinned beneath his boot. His amber eyes found Eleanor with an expression that made her breath catch. Awe, wonder, something deeper that she was afraid to name. "The bond," he said hoarsely, "she extended it, protected you from her power, because you are connected now, Eleanor. She made you hers." Mira stirred against Eleanor's shoulder. "Could not let them hurt her," the girl mumbled. "She is my person. Mine." The word carried weight that Eleanor felt settling into her bones, a warmth that chased away the morning chill. She looked down at the child in her arms, then at the vampire king who was watching them both with naked longing, and realized that her life had just changed in ways she could not begin to comprehend. "What happens now?" she asked. Kalen dragged Dravik upright, his grip merciless. "Now I deal with those who would have murdered my ward." Then I explained to my court that the Valeriu bloodline has a new protector. He met Eleanor's eyes across the ruined courtyard. "And then if you are willing, I would like to offer you a position. Mira needs guidance, education, someone to help her understand what she is becoming. You have already shown more skill at reaching her than any vampire in my household. Eleanor laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed off the ancient stones. You want to hire me as a librarian for vampires? Kalen's smile was slow and devastating. I want to offer you a home, a purpose, a place where your gifts are valued and your compassion is not punished. He paused, vulnerability flickering beneath the authority. And perhaps in time, something more. If you were interested in exploring what this connection between us might become. Mira tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. Say yes, she whispered. You are supposed to stay. I saw it when the power came. You and Kalen and me. A family. The word struck Eleanor's heart like a bell, resonating with every lonely moment she had ever weathered. She thought of her empty apartment, her terminated career, the gray future that had seemed inevitable just hours ago. Then she thought of this strange child who needed her, this ancient king who looked at her like she was something precious, this impossible world of books and blood and belonging. Yes, she said, I will stay. 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the library of Kalen's estate, surrounded by 10,000 volumes that now fell under her jurisdiction. Mira sat in her favorite reading nook, working through a stack of histories that Eleanor had curated specifically for her transition education. The girl's eyes were normal again, dark and bright, and full of a trust that still made Eleanor's chest ache with protective love. Kalen appeared in the doorway, as he often did in the evenings, drawn to this room and the people it contained. He crossed to Eleanor's desk and placed a gentle kiss against her temple, a gesture that had become familiar over weeks of slowly building intimacy. The council has formally recognized Mira's status, he said, and your position as her guardian and official historian of the Voss court. Eleanor looked up from the catalog she was creating, allowing herself a moment to study the face that had become precious to her. I was thinking of reorganizing the folklore section, she said. Your current system is archaic. Kalen laughed, the warm sound that still surprised her with its beauty. You may reorganize anything you wish. This is your domain now. Mira bounced over, inserting herself between them with the ease of a child who had finally learned what safety felt like. Can we read together tonight? The three of us, like we did last week? Eleanor wrapped an arm around the girl's shoulders, meeting Kalen's eyes over her dark head. He smiled, that slow, devastating expression that still made her pulse quicken, and nodded. Whatever you wish, little one. We have all the time in the world. And they did, Eleanor realized. Time enough to heal. Time enough to learn. Time enough to become the family that none of them had expected, but all of them had needed. She had lost her job for letting a strange child stay after hours. She had gained a kingdom, a daughter, and a love that defied every rational explanation. The strange child had led her home. And home, it turned out, was full of books and blood and belonging. And Eleanor Price would not have had it any other way.